But man, I think if you can really muster up this courage not to be mean, that's not part of it, but to be kind and clear, I think people want that today more than ever.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloemen podcast. I am your host, Brett Connolly, and joining me as she does every week, every episode, my co-host, my co-worker,
my co-friend,
sometimes my co-friend, Sarah Gonzalez.
What's up? We're back.
Are you going to say it?
We're back. It's another episode.
Okay.
I'm really happy to be here.
Maybe we're so back. I don't know. We'll figure that out afterwards. But we have, I'm excited about this guest today.
Yes.
And thank you so much for hopping on. What we typically do is we'll just do a quick intro, but also let you kind of tell a little bit of your story. But Andrea Hyre, what an appropriate last name for a Higher Purpose podcast.
Yeah.
We all knew that joke was coming, but I needed to say it.
Yeah,
it was just
had to be said.
The fruit was too low hanging. And so you have Chief Experience Officer at Paradigm Shift. You work with pre-college, in-college professionals, helping with leadership. Man, the list goes on. So like retreats, curriculum. Just tell us a little bit about your role as well as what the organization does.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Paradigm Shift, they are essentially a leadership development organization. They do it in a couple different markets, like what you said, a little bit in education, working with students or professionals. I'm more heavily on the corporate side. And so what we do there is work with businesses, large and small, maybe even executive coaches, individual coaching, or large group team development formats. We try to partner over a year time frame. So we try to really commit to the client that we have and the people we're working for. So it's a lot of leadership development. It's very experiential learning. I've learned when you say, especially in a corporate space, we do leadership development, you think of like projector, like PowerPoint, you're going to sit there for a while, and honestly, it might be boring. So we really try to dismantle that stereotype a little bit. Try to be really energetic, get people moving around a lot, which is really fun. And most of our people do an incredible job of that. And we love the clients' help too, because they actually get up and move around. So we love our partners as well. That's a lot of what we do. What my specific role is like you said, the Chief Executive Officer. And so I essentially run the back end of the company and lead the staff are my two kind of main objectives. And so I'm running, probably anything from finance, marketing to a team of about 15 that we have right now.
Wow. So
with 15 people, it's a great time, but it's a nice, small, intimate environment, but we have to get a lot done pretty fast. So they're a really hardworking group of people, and they make my job easier. But yeah, it's a lot of leading and developing and then strategizing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit. One of our favorite things to get to ask guests right off the bat is how you got to where you are. Career paths are a different stream for everybody, but how did you get to C-suite? Was that your goal? Were you shooting for C-suite? Did you know you always wanted to be in an organization like this? Kind of walk us through that roadmap.
Yeah. I had no idea I wanted to be in an organization like this.
Okay.
This one kind of fell into my lap a little bit. I was doing working for a university actually before this, and I had also there pretty quickly jumped into like a director of leadership role there as well. It was much more student based, so I had a couple full-time staff members with me, and then we led pretty large teams of students. And I was, of course, younger then as well. So I jumped from that into pretty entry-level role here at Paradigm Shift. I was doing scheduling. So that's just, getting speakers in places and very logistical, where they need to be, where they want to go. And somehow over the course of about a year, the founder, Jared, and I really hit it off. They had some big staff transitions. I was stepping in to help him quite a bit. And the transition just kind of took place pretty naturally. I did definitely work up to it. My role changed probably 6 different times in about a year time frame. My title, my title and my role probably, but eventually we just called it what it was. And it was, you're pretty much just running it. And Jared's incredible on the vision and the direction and leading big picture and where we want to go. And even the training dynamic of our speakers and facilitators. So I was a better integrating piece and leading the staff we had at hand. And once we called it what it was, that just kind of happened. It was pretty organic.
Yeah.
And I guess it was promotion from within. So
Okay.
yeah, it was great.
What tell me, what was your posture like when you came in, you know, much more lower level? What kind of leadership did you have to lead with without that title? What did you have to kind of do in order to start gaining all the different things, all the different titles that eventually morphed into CEO?
Yeah, that was probably one of the hardest things that was hard, because I was coming from a pretty big leadership position. And I remember for about 6 months, I was like, I haven't had a meeting on my calendar
Oh
in
yeah.
weeks. Like it was a very, I mean, I'm sure you guys can imagine, but you're going from like, yep, I'm doing this, that. It was a very fast paced job I was in prior to. And then this one was just kind of like, you work maybe even 9 to 4 and no one
Wow.
really needs you, no one really wants, but I definitely still had a leadership, personality, influence, persona.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think if you have that just carries with you. And honestly, it didn't, in my opinion, I don't think it always rubbed the right shoulders. I don't think people loved it because I came from a pretty high functioning team into what I would call them then being a startup.
Hmm.
And so I just saw a million things we could do better, and I voiced them. I learned how to voice them more appropriately. I will say that. But I was like, wow, you guys really like working harder and not totally smarter. Like I can see that. So I was a little rough around the edges. I think I could say that about myself, and I think they would say that about me too. I've learned how to adapt in that way. But yeah, that it was a little bit of a challenge. I think I overcame it with some really incredible coworkers. Honestly, it was a big team of leaders, and we did, even though we would kind of butt heads sometimes, I think we all worked our way towards like, okay, we all have the end goal in mind, which is to make this better. It is to acknowledge that there's some inefficiencies and let's make them more efficient.
Yeah.
And when I was doing that laterally, it did seem to work. I would say the hard part for me was when I'm coming in as probably the newest person and I'm essentially going up in the ranks, as you will, getting more influence or more
Right.
authority much
Right.
quicker than people who had been there from the start of the company.
Yeah.
And not only that, but they were all my teammates prior to that. And a lot of them turned into a lot of my friends as well. So now I'm in this position where I'm having to lead my friends, lead people who were in the company again long before I was, and a lot of them from the start of it. And so that definitely posed some challenges, but we worked through it and got better for it. I had to learn how to be a little more humble, I think, as a leader and provide a little more active listening as well, rather than just stating what I thought was right. Because my direct reports right now, and I joke about this a lot, but I would walk into meetings and think I was right. 90% of the time I really was. And so it made it hard not to feel that way. But I learned to allow the group to get there, collaborate, and then just put a stamp on the decision, especially once maybe I knew we were going to get there, maybe I didn't, but letting them be a voice in it was probably the biggest way to overcome the challenges, I was kind of mentioning before.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, and you're talking about in your role specifically, you're a leader of leaders internally, right? You're doing other things, you're spinning other plates, but are there like key qualities that you see in strong leaders as you're interacting with people? Like, man, the people that get it, the people that work well in kind of this startup, we're moving forward collectively. What are some of those qualities or traits that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of internal work. I also have clients that I work with outside, so I'm one of our
Awesome.
speakers externally as well, which has been great because I am often challenged by my own leadership. So it really keeps me humble in that way. I'm like, wow, there's really, really, really good leaders out there in the world. So step it up. So I think some of the biggest things that I've seen for myself is, I just mentioned this before, but it really has been humility. Like I think that's a big piece of even what I'm kind of looking for, in a leader. Resilience as well. Like I think in this world, you have to lead with some resilience, and some level of being okay with the fact that people will not agree with you, especially as a young leader. I think that is a big hurdle a lot of us have to cross, or a lot of people I've known have had to cross, is like, wow, a lot of people didn't actually like that decision. And especially if you have a closer relationship with them, that's kind of hard too. So
Mm.
the resilience to be able to work through that. Um, I think active listening is huge in this world right now because, like I said, a lot of us want to just jump in. We know what we want to do. We know we want to get it done. But if you're building a collaborative team and you're
Yeah.
not leading collaboratively, that definitely can put a strain on the relationships that you're trying to grow and the people you're trying to grow as well. But honestly, my favorite trait that I think I have come to, I'm always challenged in myself, but I have come to really seek in leaders is a courage to be clear, a courage to
Hmm.
provide clarity. So I'm
Yeah.
just a firm believer that, clarity is kind.
Yeah.
And that is actually a lot harder said than done. I've sat in the shoes to say that now. Like, it's definitely harder said than done.
Yeah.
But, when I find myself talking to someone in our company and I'm like, I just don't understand why this person does that. We all fall in this trap. And then you never actually address it. Like, you never
Mm.
actually are clear enough to say, don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
this is actually not how I want you to perform or operate or whatever they're doing. Do this instead, or let's redirect. It is really hard to be that clear,
Hmm.
especially if you lean towards like a positive, style of communication in leadership.
Right.
And I've worked for people like that, and I've been that person as well. But man, I think if you can really muster up this courage not to be mean, that's not part of it, but to be kind and clear, I think people want that today more than ever.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I love that. I kind of want to go back a little bit to you talked about how you walk into a room and you got promoted above people that had been there longer than you had been there, and you were kind of like they were your friends, they were your peers, you kept moving up. That's a really difficult kind of tension to be in. You talked about walking into the room and 90% of the time you are right, but you want them to get to their own decision. I know that that's a huge thing for a lot of people listening to this podcast, is what to do with that leadership when you haven't been given that title yet. How do you steward that well? I know for me that when I was growing up, I used to get called, people would just say I was bossy. And my sweet mom was like, if we steward bossy well, bossy can be leadership. Like we can really fine tune
Totally.
that, and we can get it into something that is awesome and great in a workplace and great with friends to lead well. But you have to have that humility. So kind of walk me through your journey of that, and how did you navigate that in this role with your peers, with your friends, to have that. I know you talked about humility, but kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Because it really ranged a lot, and I've am still learning big lessons in that.
Yeah.
I would say if you're talking about the level of being, you want to lead, but you don't have the title, so that piece of it,
Mm-hmm.
I am such a fan of this advice, and I wish people would do it more, but learn to anticipate your boss's needs. Like,
Yeah.
that feels like, I think sometimes when I say this, people, there's some pushback of like, that's not my job. And I'm like, I don't know. If you want to move up, it might be your job.
Yeah.
Like that,
That's good.
the people I promoted are probably, they may have not known they were doing that, but those are probably people who learned to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying cater to them. That's not what I'm saying, but anticipate the needs they have.
Right.
I genuinely think that was one of the things that connected Jared and I the most, is I did not wait to be told something. If I saw something need to be fixed, I just did it.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. And again, not perfect and not every time, but I would say there was a drive in me to just do that. I'm like, I don't need him to tell me, even down to things like the AC is not working. And there are 15 people in here who have all said the AC is not working for 3 days. And no one's called the AC person. So maybe I should just call them. Like, I wasn't in a leadership role to do that. I just was like, Jared, do you know that AC is not working? And I called them, and those are little things. And I didn't even think about it at the time as being something like that would have built his trust.
Yeah.
But it definitely did. Just the being willing to do the things people are not willing to do.
Right.
I think a
Right.
lot of people want the influence of leadership without the pain and the struggle and some of the consequences that come with it. And so that's the other piece of what I think I found in having to differentiate myself as a leader among my peers, was I couldn't, I did not do this perfect, but I have noticed, especially in those that I lead, the ones I am quicker to promote, the ones that I'm quicker to trust, are ones who don't necessarily buy into the unhealth of various relationships or various circumstances. So we were kind of a startup, and we would change a lot. Like, there was a lot of change. We were in the middle of COVID. I was hired in the middle of COVID in
Oh, wow.
2020. And it's leadership development. So how do you keep making money as a leadership development company?
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of change that naturally comes with it, but they're not in the seat and they don't know that. And so there was always just talk of this should be better and that should be better and this should be better. And I think how you show up in those conversations really positions yourself as a leader as well, or how you don't show up also shows like the type of leadership that you're willing to receive and kind of embark in as well. So I'd say those are two things that really stick out when I'm looking back.
Yeah, and it seems like no matter what space people are in, it's like leadership is changing. This next
Mhm.
generation of workforce, they have
Hmm.
different expectations. Your organization's
Totally.
in that umbrella of working with,
Yeah.
anticipating. Is there one thing within leadership or people coming up in the workforce that you go, man, young people need to be listening to this, or they need more of this, or lean into this? Like, how is leadership evolving, and what does this kind of next generation, new generation need to hear as they're prepping for the workforce if they haven't entered into it yet?
Oof. Man, there's so many.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I don't, my first answer would have been that idea of being willing to be courageous and
Mm.
bring clarity to instances. Like that really would be my first answer. But I just gave people that so they can rewind. So what I would say next is I really think that the generation coming in is seeking, this is going to be a weird one, but I think they're seeking focus a lot. And whether that's focus in their role or in the direction of a company or in their own development and their own growth, it kind of goes along with communication and setting expectations and meeting needs and things like that. But I think that there is, to be candid, I don't think a lot of young leaders know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really hard to figure out who you are when the person you're working for is also trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And that is what I would say was also a big challenge as a leader. Is like, gosh, I'm trying to lead people and I don't even see the roadmap. And so I think once I really found myself like, let's focus on three things that really matter, like they actually matter to the bottom line but also to the people as well. um, I think I started to see a shift in my own leadership through that, and it made one-on-ones more effective. I'm like, we're not going to talk about the things that don't necessarily matter, or just check boxes that HR would say to check
Yeah.
necessarily. And I was running HR, so I had a little more freedom there. But I transformed a lot of our people development in that way, because I just had to answer that question, like, what really matters? What honestly matters? And that's different for every company. It's different for every leader.
Right.
But when we got really good at that and we made those weekly meetings very focused on four key things we talk about every single week, I saw people develop more in a year than I had really in the last 3 years
Wow.
combined. It just took a pretty big level of focus for me to say, what should those four things be? And that took a long time for me to figure that out. But man, once it was implemented, I really did see people flourish in less chaos. Not
Yeah.
saying there's not chaos, but focus in less chaos, a little bit more of anticipating and understanding what's coming next.
Yeah, that's good. You kind of touched a little bit on this, so I want to ask this question. A big word right now is for Gen Z is this imposter syndrome, like landing the job that maybe they've really wanted, and then they
Yeah.
get in it and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm wearing a really cool outfit that looks like I should know what I'm doing, but I am so stinking lost. And so, kind of talk to us, what do you do when you're feeling that? How do you step into that role? If you have the title, if you don't have the title, but whatever it may be that you're stepping into, that you feel like you have the credentials maybe, but you have none of the experience and you're feeling that imposter syndrome, how do you kind of step out in boldness with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably I'd say two things. One is I own it. Like I lead very often with my team, like, hey, guys, I do not know. This is my first time making this decision on this kind of thing, and it's your first time following me doing it. Like, I don't know if it's gonna work. I'm
That's
asking
good.
for grace in the process of leading this thing. Um, if I am leading like I have all the answers, I might actually feel more confident in that time. But there's just been a lot of times where I've told my team, like, guys, I don't know. What do you think? Like, where would you go? Give me advice, give me feedback on what you're seeing. I think the biggest piece that I've used in that kind of schematic of understanding, like, it's not actually all on you. Just because you're the leader doesn't mean you're the smartest person in the room. It took me a long time to figure that out, but you do not have to be the smartest person in the room. Get really freaking smart people in the room
Yeah.
and hear what they have to say. So I've kind of, developed this mantra of I'm like, okay, well, data's going to inform me, people are going to advise me, but I do have to decide.
Yeah.
So when you let the imposter syndrome stop you or not slow down your decision making, because that's okay, but when you find yourself stuck in decision making, that's when you're letting the imposter syndrome get way ahead of you. So
Right.
yeah, those are the two things I would really say is, yeah, use data, use people, and then make a really educated decision, but don't be afraid to own the fact that you don't know. It's your first time doing this.
Yeah.
That's the part of humility I talked about before. I think that's what a humble leader looks like.
Yeah. Because on the flip side, if you don't know, but you're acting like you do, it may end up really hurting your team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and I've made that mistake too, for sure.
Yeah.
I've definitely made that mistake.
It happens. It happens.
It always, yeah, that's the thing. I'm like, man, I've learned so much more from my failures than the things I did really, really well. Like
Yeah.
in podcasts like this, I'm not thinking like, oh yeah, this is what I did really well. And I would tell them, it's like, yeah, I would do that differently. And so, yeah, don't be afraid of failure in that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
And what personally motivates you with like leadership and professional development?
Yeah, it's people for me, for sure. I mean, I'm in a people industry, right? So I just always believe that there's a greater potential in people than what they see in themselves, whether that's my team I'm leading or, a speaking engagement of 50 people, or I'm doing one-on-one coaching session. I'm just such a firm believer that there's always something more. I have had to remind myself that if that person doesn't want to tap into the something more that is within them, you have to let them
That's right.
decide that for themselves and go. So that is a
Yeah.
big trap I've fallen in, because I really believe that so strongly. But you have so much more in you.
Yeah.
I think I remember my boss saying, like, they do, but if they're not willing to use it, we have to let them move on.
Right.
I'm like,
That's right.
yeah,
Right.
that's a good point. But it does motivate me. I just have such a belief in people that there's so much hidden potential that can still be unlocked if they're just given the right people, the right resources, and the right even mentor or coach above them in order to help them pull that out. Yeah.
That's good. Something we love to ask as well. I know that you've got this job and this title. You also have a life outside of work. We talk a lot about work-life balance. Is that even a real phrase? Is it possible? Can we do it? What does that look like for you? What's kind of your advice that you'd want to tell our audience on how to have that work-life balance and what that looks like?
I don't love the term work-life balance. I don't have a lot of that in my life. I really, and my husband and I both kind of more subscribe to this idea of like rhythms more so. So there are,
Yeah.
I'll look at my calendar, and I have had to get way better at that, being in the role I'm in and speaking and leading a team. Like I am glued to my calendar. So I'll look
Yeah.
2 months out, and I'll say like, hey, these 3 weeks right here, I mean, work is going to get a lot of it. Like I need you to know it's a lot of communication back and forth, but hey, I need you to know, I want you to know I'm gone this day, this day, this day. It's a full throttle for 3 weeks. So my mother-in-law, she is around as well. So it takes a lot of communication. Like I said before, we just more so subscribe to the idea of rhythms over balance. And so I just have to be proactive in my calendar to know, hey, if I 4 weeks is kind of my limit. So I'm like, if work is getting a bit more of me in a 4 week time frame, that's where I start to say no a lot more, or put some good boundaries in place. But typically, just the way that my industry goes and our work schedule is, it kind of flows itself. Like this month is really, really busy, and then I have some downtime with the kids and family. And so that's one way that we've done it, is a lot of proactive communication between my husband and I. But the other thing with work-life balance, and I would actually recommend this to any young leader out there, but I have a coach who really, we work on a lot of different things, but she'll just hold me accountable too, to like, hey, what is your work-life balance? What are you doing when you're home? How often are you home? Are you present when you're home? Because that's another thing as well. So yeah, that's probably the two big pieces of advice I would give. But the coach has really made a huge difference in my leadership development as well.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So
That's good. And kind of our North Star with this podcast is wanting to be a good steward of this one life we're given, and these are, most of the listeners are maybe just starting off in their career, or maybe they're one step in and kind of that imposter syndrome going, am I not, should I shift? As you're now so much more established in your career, Is there something, maybe one or two things that you go, man, I wish I would have known this back then? Is there one or two, like Nuggets, which is the name of your dog, I believe? Is there one or two things that you said, man, I wish I'd have known that back then?
There's too many. So I'll give you one or two, but yeah, I've learned, like I said, a lot through failure. Yeah, I think one of them has been this idea, and I don't mean this in a negative way actually, but the higher you go in leadership, the lonelier I think it is, and I think you need to let it be. I've mentioned, a couple times now that I had to go personally. This isn't always people's story, but I had to go from being among peers to leading them, and I wish I would have done a better job setting some boundaries in that transition of, hey, I know the courage to be clear, like what I was saying earlier. I know that this is different. I know our dynamic is a little different. Some of them were my friends. I wish I would have had a brutally honest conversation. Like, if we think this is going to interfere, we should pick one. And I'm okay if that means you don't stay here or pick that. Or if we don't pick the friendship as close as it was, I could be okay with that too. But man, I wish I had a little bit more courage earlier on to make some better boundaries and some clear divides of like, yeah, we used to be able to talk like, or I used to be able to say, yeah, I don't know what he's doing either, but I can't, I just can't do that anymore. And so there's like a bigger weight and responsibility on it. But I don't think your whole life should be lonely. So I think, yeah, in work, I've been in some really lonely instances, decision making. That's the role that I play. That's the role I'm in. But I try to do a really good job of building a small circle outside of work.
That's good.
At a healthy circle, a small healthy circle, I should say.
Good distinction.
Outside of work. It is, because honestly, some people do have circles as well, but they maybe don't call them higher. So, yeah, healthy couple, close friends that and mentors, that do help me distinguish and decipher. Wow, that was hard, but man, you can't let it be your friends or the people that you lead, that you're leading. It's not fair to them. It's not fair to you. So I wish I had learned that much earlier than I did. And the last thing I wish I learned is, I said it like a lesson, and it is a lesson, but I think that idea of voicing when you're really unsure of something, or voicing when you need help more so. I think especially young leaders, we don't feel like we can, right? Because it diminishes, like, well, I'm already coming in with no experience, and I'm already coming in with this kind of imposter syndrome, as you said. So why would I ask for help? But man, looking back, I just wish I would have. I think I would have learned a couple lessons earlier, and maybe even been able to avoid a few. So those two nuggets are probably what I would leave.
Yeah, those are so good. Those are so good. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you are obviously, like you said, you've got a lot of different tasks on your plate within your role at work. You're also a mother and a wife, a daughter, all the things outside of that place. So thank you so much for setting aside the time. And I can't wait to go back and listen to this. You said so many things that I was like, oh, wait, let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back. So I'm going to have to re-listen like 4 or 5 times to gain all of it. But thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloemen podcast. If you want to listen to our other episodes, you can go to ahigherpurposepodcast.com. You can also stream any of our podcasts from YouTube, Amazon, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us along on our social medias, A Higher Purpose Podcast, and we'll see you next week.